It's been quite damaging, and the revelations just keep coming. There was an initial report at the beginning of April from ProPublica, a publication here in the United States, about the trips that Justice Thomas had been taking with Harlan Crow, who's a real estate billionaire here in the United States and a Republican stalwart, that Justice Thomas hadn't disclosed on the financial disclosure forms that he files each year. Justice Thomas issued a statement through the Supreme Court that said he'd consulted with colleagues and legal experts, and that he thought that this was the kind of personal hospitality that he wasn't required to report. But ethics experts say that even if the meals and the lodging were personal hospitality, that the private jet travel and the yacht travel, which can cost regular people hundreds of thousands of dollars, were clearly something he was required to report. And then after that, the revelations just kept coming about Harlan Crow buying his mother's house and renovating it while she continued to live there, and about Harlan Crow paying for Justice Thomas's great nephew, for whom he's the legal guardian, to attend a private boarding school in Georgia. And it's been very damaging to the court. On the other hand, there's short of impeachment, there's really very little that can happen. And with a divided Congress, with the Republicans in control of the House, it's not something that's likely to happen.
Yeah, it is astonishing that there is not an established code of ethics for a group of people that are supposed to be the standard bearers of the country.
There's not an established code of conduct. There is a code of conduct for the lower court judges in the United States. The Supreme Court justices say they subscribe to that. They try to follow that. And in the wake of some of the scandals involving Justice Thomas, they issued a statement signed by all 9 justices in which they sort of reaffirmed their commitment to the code of conduct. But even then, they said there are some things that we can't follow necessarily in the same way that the lower court judges do with regard to recusal, because there are only 9 of us. And so if someone recuses himself or herself, they say, then the court is left shorthanded. And they say for security concerns, we may not always be able to disclose our travel and our accommodations. And I will say back in 2019, Justice Elena Kagan was testifying before the House of Representatives about the Supreme Court's budget. That's something that Supreme Court justices do every few years. And she said back then that they were considering a code of conduct. I think the fact that they haven't issued one since then suggests that there is sort of internal disagreement about what to do. There have been in the past bipartisan calls in Congress for a code of conduct. But recently, all of those calls have come from the Democratic side, because conservatives, Republicans in Congress like Justice Thomas a lot. They like the direction that this court is going in. And even then, there are also questions about whether or not Congress can prescribe a code of ethics for the Supreme Court, or whether or not it's something the Supreme Court would have to do on its own.
Do for itself, yes. You would seem that they would want to do to sort of give themselves an air of propriety. You talk about the decision-making, and it seems highly politicised. We know the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I noticed another case where they were blocking water protection. So the waterways, the quality of the waterways was blocked. The federal government isn't allowed to monitor that. Historically, how should the Supreme Court rule? Should it only be by law, or has it in the past been highly politicised as well?
I think that depends a lot on who you ask. I think that conservatives would tell you that this court isn't politicized, that it happens to have right now a 6-3 conservative majority, and that the conservatives on the Supreme Court aren't acting politically, that in a decision like Dobbs, the abortion case last year, the gun rights case last year, or the water case that they issued just a couple of weeks ago, that they're reading the text of the Constitution, the statute, the Clean Water Act, the federal law governing water pollution, and they're making their decisions based on the law. I think liberals would tell you that in the past, we have had, I think the other thing that conservatives would say is that, that many of the Supreme Court's decisions are unanimous, or 7-2 or 8-1, that the court is not politicized, that But I think that the liberals would tell you that the decisions that people really care about, these 6-3 decisions in cases like the abortion case or the gun rights cases, that the justices are really voting, for sort of Democratic results or Republican results, on sort of in conjunction with the politics of the president who appointed them, in a way that the Supreme Court really hasn't in the past. When Justice Anthony Kennedy retired in 2018, the Supreme Court really changed in a way, because until then, there'd always been justices who didn't necessarily vote in alignment with the president who appointed them. And the process of confirmation has certainly become very politicized. Justice Antonin Scalia, a conservative stalwart, was confirmed unanimously. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who'd worked for the liberal group, the American Civil Liberties Union, I think only had 3 no votes. And then you have Ketanji Brown Jackson, who was confirmed last year to the Supreme Court, was a vote of 53 to 47, with only 3 Republicans joining the Democrats to vote for her. So it's clearly become much more polarized in that sense.
You talked about, the appointments, and we know Donald Trump managed to get 3 conservatives onto the court, but it seems another presidential hopeful, Ron DeSantis, is also fostering very close ties with some of the justices.
Yes, that's right. And there have been reports about his connections, in particular to Justice Clarence Thomas. He has talked about how if he were elected president, he might have the opportunity to appoint, yet another conservative justice, making it a 7-2 court. I will say that if he's running against Donald Trump, certainly I think that this would help distinguish him from the other Republican candidates in the field. And it was certainly a good tactic for Donald Trump back in 2016, when some social conservatives were concerned about, was Donald Trump really one of us? He released in the fall of 2016 a list of candidates and said, I'm going to appoint one of these justices, one of these judges, if I'm elected to the Supreme Court and there's a vacancy. And I think it gave them a lot of confidence that they could vote for him. And at the Supreme Court, something that conservatives are very concerned about. But I'm not sure that he can necessarily out-Trump Trump on the Supreme Court, because Donald Trump can say, you can say who you're going to appoint, but, I have a track record on the Supreme Court. I appointed these 3 justices who did, in fact, overturn Roe versus Wade. And then the flip side of that is, if he were to become the Republican candidate in the general election, I'm not sure that saying that you're close friends with Clarence Thomas and you're going to appoint more justices like him is going to necessarily help to win over the swing voters.
No, I don't think much that Ron DeSantis is doing is going to target the swing voters, but it is fascinating to see that there are not more safeguards, Amy, for a court that is so critical. Good to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Great to talk to you.